Stop crying. People like you are replaceable. The manager's voice cut like glass as Evelyn gripped her mop, shoulders shaking. Marcus stood a few feet away in a cheap uniform, unseen, unheard, just another worker. But he wasn't. He watched as the manager snatched her time card, whispering about unpaid hours and threats if she spoke. Evelyn broke. My son needs his medication. I can't lose this job. Marcus's jaw tightened. That night, he made one call. The next morning, the entire staff gathered. The same manager smirked, until Marcus stepped forward, voice calm. My name is Marcus Hale. Silence cracked the room. And I own this company. But what he uncovered next was far worse than anyone imagined. Stop crying. People like you are replaceable. The words didn't just echo. They settled into the fluorescent-lit hallway like something permanent, something heavy. The kind of sentence that didn't need to be repeated to be understood. Evelyn Brooks stood frozen, her hands gripping the handle of a worn mop, knuckles pale, shoulders trembling just enough to betray the storm she was trying to hold back. The smell of industrial cleaner hung thick in the air, sharp and sterile, clinging to the back of the throat. Somewhere down the corridor, a cartwheel squeaked in uneven rhythm. But here, in this narrow service hallway behind aisle 7, everything felt still. Marcus Hale stood a few feet away, dressed in a plain gray uniform that didn't fit quite right, a name tag that wasn't his, and silence that was very much intentional. To everyone else, he was just another temporary hire, another invisible body filling a gap on a schedule. But Marcus wasn't invisible. He was watching, listening, measuring. The manager, tall, polished, voice dipped in casual authority, didn't even lower his tone. You clocked out at 9 o'clock. Anything after that? Not my problem. He waved a hand like he was brushing dust off a table. If you can't handle it, there are plenty of people who can. Evelyn swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. I stayed because you asked me to. The floor wasn't done. You said, I said what I needed to say to get the job done. He cut in, smooth, practiced. Don't confuse that with permission. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter. Something colder. He had built this company from nothing, from late nights, and borrowed money and a belief that if you created something strong enough, fair enough, it would carry people with it. That it would lift them. That it would matter. But standing here now, watching a woman in her 50s shrink under the weight of a conversation that shouldn't exist in a company like his, he felt the first crack in that belief. Evelyn nodded, too quickly, the kind of nod that wasn't agreement but survival. I understand, she said, even though it was clear she didn't. Or maybe she understood too well. The manager stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to make it feel personal. And one more thing. That overtime request you submitted? Forget it. There's no record of you being here past your shift. He gave her a thin smile. Unless you want to make this a bigger issue. The words hung there, unfinished, but complete. Evelyn's grip loosened. The mop slipped slightly, the rubber tip dragging against the tile with a dull scrape. For a second, she didn't move. Then her shoulders dropped, just a fraction, like something inside her had quietly given way. My son, she started, then stopped. Her voice cracked, not loud, not dramatic, just enough to break the rhythm of the moment. He needs his medication this week. I can't afford to lose hours. Marcus didn't move. He didn't interrupt. But something in his posture changed, almost imperceptibly, like a line had been drawn somewhere deep inside him. The manager sighed, checking his watch like time itself was more important than the person in front of him. That's not my concern, he said flatly. My concern is running this store efficiently. Efficiently. The word echoed in Marcus's mind, hollow and misplaced. He had used that word in boardrooms, in investor calls, in quarterly reports. He had tied it to growth, to innovation, to success. But here, in this hallway that smelled like bleach and exhaustion, it sounded different. It sounded like something else entirely. The manager turned to leave, already done with the conversation, already moving on. Clean up the rest of aisle 7 before you go, he added over his shoulder. And try not to fall behind again. His footsteps faded quickly, confident, unbothered. The hallway swallowed the sound. For a moment, there was nothing. Just the hum of overhead lights and the faint drip of a leaking pipe. Somewhere out of sight. Then Evelyn sank down slowly, like her legs had finally decided they couldn't carry what her heart had been holding. She sat on the cold tile, one hand covering her mouth, the other still clutching the mop handle like it was the only thing keeping her anchored. The tears came quietly, no sobbing, no sound, just a steady release that felt older than this moment, older than this job. Marcus stood there, still in the shadows of a life he had stepped into by choice, and for the first time since walking into his own store, he didn't feel like an observer. He felt like someone who had just been handed a truth he could no longer ignore. And somewhere, deep beneath the polished image of the company he had built, he began to realize that what was happening in this hallway wasn't an exception. It was a system, and systems didn't break by accident. Marcus did not move right away. He let the silence stretch, not because he did not know what to say, but because he understood that this moment was not about words. It was about seeing, really seeing. Evelyn wiped her face quickly, as if even her tears needed permission, and pushed herself back up with a quiet determination that felt practiced, almost routine. She adjusted her uniform, smoothed the wrinkles that had never really left, and reached for the mop again like nothing had happened. Like everything had happened before. Marcus stepped forward then, his voice low, careful. You should not have to do that. She flinched slightly, not from fear, but from surprise. People did not usually speak to her after moments like this. They walked away, pretended not to notice. She gave him a small, polite smile that did not reach her eyes. It is fine, she said, the kind of answer that meant it was not fine at all. Marcus studied her for a second longer, then glanced down the hallway where the manager had disappeared. How often does that happen? He asked. Evelyn hesitated, not because she did not know the answer, but because she was deciding whether it was safe to tell it. Enough, she said finally. One word. Heavy. Complete. Marcus nodded slowly. He had heard answers like that before in different forms, in different rooms, but never like this. Never from someone holding a mop in a hallway that should have never held this kind of conversation. Do they always change your hours? He pressed gently. Evelyn let out a breath that sounded more like release than relief. Sometimes they just adjust things. Say it is a system error, or that I forgot to clock in, or out. It depends on the week. She shrugged, but there was no indifference in it. Only exhaustion. Marcus felt that quiet shift again, deeper this time. He had signed off on systems that tracked time down to the minute. He had approved software updates, efficiency tools, reporting dashboards. Numbers had always been clean, precise, reliable. But people were clearly not part of that equation anymore. Have you reported it? He asked. Evelyn almost laughed, but it stopped halfway, turning into something softer, sadder. To who? She said. The manager is the one who signs off on everything. In human resources, she paused, choosing her words carefully. They listen, they nod, and then nothing changes. Marcus looked down at the tile floor, the faint reflection of overhead lights stretching in uneven lines. Nothing changes. The phrase echoed in his mind like a verdict. What about your coworkers? He asked. Evelyn shook her head. Everyone has their own situation. Some people have kids. Some are in school. Some just need the job. You do not make trouble when you need something to survive. Marcus absorbed that in silence. Survival. That was not a word that should be tied to a job in one of his stores. Not in a company that reported record profits quarter after quarter. Not in a system he had built to be better than the ones he had once struggled through himself. What is your son's name? He asked suddenly. Evelyn blinked, caught off guard by the shift. Daniel, she said softly. He is 12. There was something in her voice now, something warmer, something that had not been there before. He is strong. Stronger than me, I think. Marcus nodded. What does he need? Evelyn hesitated again, but this time it was different. Less fear. More vulnerability. Medication. It is not something we can skip, she said carefully. Insurance covers some of it. Not all. So I pick up extra shifts when I can. Or try to. Marcus felt the weight of her words settle in a place he could not ignore. This was not just about hours on a timesheet. This was about a system that quietly decided who got to breathe easier and who had to fight for it every single day. And if you do not get those hours? He asked, even though he already knew. Evelyn looked at him then, really looked at him for the first time. There was no anger in her eyes. No accusation. Just a simple, unfiltered truth. Then I figure something out, she said. You always do. Marcus exhaled slowly. He had built a company that prided itself on solutions, on innovation, on fixing problems before they became crises. But here, In this hallway, the solution had been outsourced to the people who could least afford to carry it. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, unremarkable phone that did not match the uniform he was wearing. Evelyn noticed, but said nothing. He stepped a few feet away, turning slightly, his voice dropping to a tone that no longer belonged to an employee. "I need a full audit of store location 47, he said quietly. "Time logs, payroll adjustments, manager approvals, everything. Start with the last 90 days. No internal filters. I want raw data." There was a pause on the other end, then a response Marcus did not need to hear out loud. "Yes." Immediately, he added before ending the call. When he turned back, Evelyn was watching him, curiosity flickering behind her caution. "You sound important," she said, half joking, half guessing. Marcus allowed himself the smallest hint of a smile, but it did not reach his eyes. "Not important enough," he replied. "Not yet." And as he looked at her, standing there with quiet strength in a place that had given her every reason to break, he realized that whatever he was about to uncover was going to be bigger than one hallway, one manager, or one broken promise. It was going to be a truth that had been hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to finally see it. The store did not change overnight, but Marcus did. The next morning, he arrived earlier than anyone else. Long before the automatic doors unlocked and the polished floors reflected the soft glow of sunrise through the glass. The building was quiet, almost honest in a way it never was during business hours. No music, no chatter, just the low hum of electricity and the distant tick of a wall clock counting seconds no one usually noticed. Marcus walked the aisle slowly, not as an owner inspecting assets, but as a man trying to understand a place that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Every shelf, every register, every neatly arranged display had once represented growth, success, proof that something he built had worked. But now, he saw something else layered beneath it. Something quieter, something heavier. At 6:12 a.m., Evelyn was already there. Not in the hallway this time, but near the front entrance, carefully wiping down the glass doors in slow, deliberate motions. Her reflection moved with her, slightly distorted, like the version of herself the world chose to see. She did not notice Marcus at first. Or maybe she did and chose not to react. Either way, she kept working. "You are here early," Marcus said gently as he approached. Evelyn glanced over, offering a small nod. "Early is the only time things get done without someone telling you how to do them," she replied. There was no bitterness in her tone, just fact. Marcus leaned against a nearby counter, watching the way she worked. Efficient, quiet, invisible by design. "Did you ever want something else?" he asked after a moment. The question lingered between them, unexpected, almost out of place in a store that measured value in sales numbers and hourly output. Evelyn paused, cloth in hand, eyes resting on the glass as if the answer might be written there. "Everyone wants something else at some point," she said finally. "But wanting does not always pay the bills." Marcus nodded, absorbing the simplicity of that truth. He had spent years in rooms where people spoke about ambition like it was a choice anyone could make if they tried hard enough. But standing here now, he understood something those rooms never taught him. Choice was a luxury, and not everyone could afford it. The doors slid open automatically as the first employee of the day walked in, followed by another, then another. The store began to wake up, slowly shifting from stillness to motion. Voices filled the air. Footsteps echoed across tile. And just like that, the quiet truth of the early morning began to disappear behind the noise of routine. Marcus stepped back into his role, picking up a small box from a delivery cart, blending into the flow of workers preparing for another day. But he was not just observing anymore. He was waiting. At 8:03 a.m., the manager arrived. Same polished shoes, same confident stride, same voice that carried just enough authority to be heard across the room without ever being questioned. "Let us keep it moving today," he called out, clapping his hands once. "We are behind on inventory, and I do not want any surprises." No one responded. They never did. They just worked faster. Marcus watched as the manager moved from station to station, offering instructions that sounded more like corrections, glancing at time sheets, making notes on a tablet that seemed to hold more power than it should. And then it happened. Subtle, quick, easy to miss if you were not looking for it. The manager stopped near the back office, speaking quietly to his supervisor. Marcus could not hear every word, but he did not need to. He saw the screen. A time log. Numbers shifting. Hours adjusted with a swipe of a finger. Clean. Effortless. Invisible. Marcus felt that cold clarity settle in again. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a one-time mistake. This was a system, built not with code, but with permission. Unspoken. Repeated. Protected. He turned slightly, just enough to catch Evelyn in his peripheral vision. She was restocking supplies, moving with the same quiet focus as before. But now, Marcus saw the cost of that focus. The hours that never made it to a paycheck. The effort that never translated into security. The dignity that had to be negotiated moment by moment. His phone vibrated softly in his pocket. He stepped away, just out of sight, pulling it out with a calm that did not match the urgency of what he was feeling. The message was short, direct. Audit in progress. Preliminary findings attached. Marcus opened the file, eyes scanning quickly. Patterns. Repeated adjustments. Missing overtime. Approvals tied to the same names. It was all there, laid out in numbers that finally told the truth people had been forced to hide. He exhaled slowly, the weight of it settling deeper than he expected. Not because he did not believe it, but because he had not seen it sooner. When he looked back up, the store was in full motion. Customers beginning to filter in. Employees moving faster, speaking less. Everything looked normal. That was the problem. Marcus slipped the phone back into his pocket, his gaze steady now, no longer searching, no longer questioning. He had found what he came for. But what he had found was not just a problem to fix. It was a truth that demanded something more. And for the first time since stepping into his own store without a title, without recognition, without protection, Marcus understood that the real test was not whether he could see the system. It was whether he was willing to break it. The numbers did not lie, but they did not speak loudly either. They whispered, hidden inside spreadsheets and timestamps, buried beneath layers of approval and routine. Marcus stood in the stockroom later that afternoon, the faint buzz of overhead lights pressing down on the silence as he stared at his phone again. The audit report had grown longer, heavier, more detailed with every passing hour. It was not just Evelyn. It was dozens of employees. Different roles. Different schedules. Same pattern. Hours shaved. Overtime erased. Adjustments signed off with quiet consistency. It was precise. Intentional. And most of all, it was allowed to continue because no one had stopped it. Marcus closed his eyes for a brief second, not to escape, but to steady himself. He had spent years building systems to prevent failure, to catch errors before they became problems. But this was not an error. This was a choice. Repeated. Reinforced. Protected by silence. You look like you found something you were not supposed to, a voice said behind him. Marcus turned to see Evelyn standing near the doorway, a small supply box in her hands. She was watching him carefully, not with suspicion, but with a kind of quiet awareness that came from years of reading people without being noticed. Marcus slipped the phone back into his pocket, but not before the weight of what he had seen settled into his posture. Maybe I did, he replied. Evelyn stepped inside, placing the box on a nearby shelf with gentle precision. Most people do not come back here unless they have to, she said. It is not where the important things happen. Marcus looked around the room. Metal shelves. Inventory stacked in neat rows. Labels facing forward. Everything in its place. Everything accounted for. That depends on what you think is important, he said quietly. Evelyn gave a small nod, as if she understood more than she let on. Important usually means visible, she said. And this place, she glanced around, is not that. Marcus leaned against the edge of a shelf, arms crossed loosely, his mind still moving through the data he had just seen. What would happen if someone challenged it? He asked, his voice steady but deliberate. Evelyn did not answer right away. She took a moment, as if weighing not just the question, but the risk of answering it honestly. They would be told it is a misunderstanding, she said finally. Then they would be told to let it go. And if they do not, she paused, her expression tightening just enough to reveal the truth behind her words. They usually do not stay long after that. Marcus felt that cold clarity again, sharper this time. Not just a broken system. A controlled one. So people learn to stay quiet, he said. Evelyn met his eyes. People learn to survive, she corrected gently. The distinction mattered. Marcus nodded slowly. Survival was not silence. It was adaptation. It was choosing the least dangerous path in a situation that should never have been dangerous to begin with. His phone vibrated again. Another update. More data. More confirmation. He did not need to read it this time. He already knew what it would say. The pattern was too consistent to be anything else. You ever think about leaving? He asked, shifting the conversation, but not the meaning behind it. Evelyn let out a soft breath, almost like a quiet laugh that had lost its humor somewhere along the way. Every day, she said. And every day, I remember why I cannot. Marcus studied her for a moment, seeing not just the woman in front of him, but the weight she carried, the choices she did not get to make, the strength it took to keep showing up anyway. What if something changed, he asked. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. Changed how? Marcus hesitated, not because he did not have an answer, but because the answer he had would change everything. What if the people making those decisions were held accountable, he said. The words felt different coming out of his mouth now. Less theoretical. More real. Evelyn watched him closely, searching for something beneath the surface of his tone. That would be something, she said carefully. But people in positions like that do not usually get held accountable. They make the rules. Marcus straightened slightly, the quiet shift in his posture almost invisible, but undeniable. Rules can be rewritten, he said. Evelyn held his gaze for a second longer, then gave a small, uncertain nod. Maybe, she said, but not by people like me. Marcus did not respond right away. He simply looked at her, really looked this time, and for the first time since this began, there was no distance between what he knew and what he needed to do. Maybe not, he said quietly, but not everyone here is who they seem to be. The words hung in the air, subtle but loaded, like the first crack in something that had been sealed for too long. Evelyn frowned slightly, as if trying to understand what he meant, but before she could ask, the sound of the manager's voice echoed from the main floor, sharp and commanding. I need everyone up front in 5 minutes. Staff meeting. The store shifted again, the rhythm changing, tension threading through the routine. Evelyn glanced toward the door, then back at Marcus. That does not usually happen, she said. Marcus pushed himself off the shelf, his expression calm, but his eyes carrying something new. Something resolved. Maybe it is time something did, he replied. And as they both stepped out of the stockroom and into the bright, controlled chaos of the store floor, neither of them realized that the next few minutes were about to expose more than just a broken system. They were about to reveal who had the power to change it, and who had been carrying the truth all along. The room did not feel like a meeting. It felt like a test. Employees gathered near the front registers, forming a loose line that was not quite straight, not quite relaxed. Some stood with arms crossed, others with hands clasped in front of them, all carrying that same quiet alertness that came from experience. The kind that said this was not about information. This was about control. Marcus stood among them, just another uniform in a sea of gray, but his stillness set him apart. He was not waiting to be told something. He was waiting to confirm it. The manager stepped forward, tablet in hand, posture sharp, voice smooth. Let us keep this quick, he began, scanning the group like he was counting pieces on a board. There have been some discrepancies in scheduling and reporting. Nothing major, but enough to address. A few employees exchanged glances. Not confusion. Recognition. Marcus noticed it immediately. This was not new to them. This was routine dressed up as concern. The manager continued, tapping his screen. From now on, all time entries must be verified through management before submission. No exceptions. We need accuracy. Accuracy. The word landed flat, almost ironic. Marcus felt the weight of it press against everything he had just seen. Accuracy was not the problem. It was the excuse. Evelyn stood near the edge of the group, slightly behind the others, her presence as quiet as ever. But Marcus could see it now, the way her shoulders held just a little tighter, the way her eyes stayed low, not out of submission, but calculation. She was listening for what mattered. Not what was said, but what it meant. If there are any questions, the manager added, glancing up briefly, now is the time. Silence followed. Not because there were no questions, but because everyone in that room already knew the cost of asking them. Marcus let the silence stretch for a moment longer, feeling it settle, feeling it reveal exactly what it was meant to hide. Then he stepped forward. Just one step. Small. Measured. But enough. I have one, he said. His voice was calm, even, carrying just enough to be heard without demanding attention. The manager looked up, slightly surprised, eyes narrowing for a fraction of a second as he tried to place him. Go ahead, he said, tone neutral but guarded. Marcus met his gaze. How does the system handle overtime adjustments? The question was simple, direct, but it landed differently than the others that had been swallowed by silence before it. The manager paused, just briefly, but long enough for Marcus to notice. Overtime is reviewed and approved based on store needs, he replied smoothly. If it is not approved, it is not recorded. Standard policy. Standard policy. Another phrase that sounded clean on the surface and complicated underneath. Marcus nodded slightly, as if accepting the answer, but did not step back. And who verifies that the hours worked matched the hours recorded? He asked. This time, the pause was longer. The manager's grip on the tablet tightened just enough to give it away. Management oversees that process, he said, his voice still controlled, but no longer effortless. A shift had begun. Subtle but real. Marcus took another step forward, closing the distance just enough to change the dynamic. So if there is a discrepancy, he continued, the same person who approves the hours is also responsible for correcting them. It was not a question anymore. It was a statement. The room felt different now. Quieter. Tighter. Employees who had been looking at the floor slowly lifted their eyes. Not openly, not boldly, but enough to follow what was happening. The manager straightened, a practiced response to pressure. If there is a concern, it can be escalated through the proper channels, he said, emphasizing each word like it was a shield. Marcus nodded again, but this time there was no pretense of agreement. And when those channels lead back to the same person? He asked. The words hung in the air, sharper now, cutting through the polished language and landing somewhere real. The manager's expression shifted, just slightly, the confidence thinning at the edges. I am not sure what you are implying, he said, his tone firmer now, more defensive than before. Marcus did not raise his voice. He did not need to. I am not implying anything, he said calmly. I am asking how a system corrects itself when the problem is inside the system. Silence. This time, it was different. Not passive. Not conditioned. This silence had weight. It had direction. The kind that made people listen even if they did not want to. Evelyn looked up fully now, her eyes fixed on Marcus, something shifting behind them. Not fear. Not yet. Something closer to recognition. The manager glanced around the room, as if searching for support, but found none. Just faces. Watching. Waiting. We follow company guidelines, he said finally, his voice tight. And those guidelines have worked just fine. Marcus let that settle for a second, then reached into his pocket slowly, deliberately, pulling out the same unremarkable phone. The same one that did not belong to the role he was playing. The screen lit up in his hand, casting a faint glow that felt out of place in the controlled lighting of the store. He looked at it briefly, then back at the manager. That depends on who they are working for, he said quietly. The words did not sound like a challenge. They sounded like a conclusion. And for the first time since the meeting began, the balance in the room shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough for everyone there to feel it. Something was changing, and it was no longer invisible. The air in the room did not just shift, it tightened, like something invisible had been pulled too far and was about to snap. The manager's eyes flicked to the phone in Marcus's hand, then back to his face, searching, recalculating, trying to place a man who no longer fit the role he had assigned him. If you have a concern, the manager said, his voice measured but no longer smooth, you can bring it to me after the meeting. This is not the place for speculation. Speculation. The word hung there, thin and fragile against the weight of everything Marcus now knew. Marcus did not move. He did not lower the phone. It is not speculation if it is documented, he said quietly. The sentence did not rise in volume, but it landed harder than anything else that had been said. A ripple moved through the group, subtle but undeniable. A few employees shifted their stance. Someone in the back lifted their head just a little higher. The silence was no longer passive. It was listening. The manager let out a short breath, the kind that tried to regain control without showing effort. You are new, he said, his tone sharpening slightly. You do not understand how things operate here. Marcus held his gaze, steady, unflinching. That is exactly the problem, he replied. The words were simple, but they carried something deeper now. Not just observation. Authority. Not declared, but felt. The manager took a step forward, closing the distance, trying to reclaim space, trying to reassert the hierarchy that had always worked in his favor. I am responsible for this store, he said, each word placed carefully, like a reminder. And I make sure it runs the way it is supposed to. Marcus nodded once, as if acknowledging the statement, but not accepting it. You are responsible, he said. That part is clear. He lifted the phone slightly, just enough for the light to catch the screen. What is not clear is why the same adjustments show up across multiple employees, across multiple weeks, all approved under the same authority. The manager's expression changed, just for a second. It was not fear. Not yet. But it was no longer certainty. I do not know what you think you are looking at, he said, the edge in his voice more visible now. But internal data is not something you have access to. Marcus's thumb moved across the screen, slow, deliberate. Store 47, he said calmly. Last 90 days. 23 employees with adjusted hours. 15 of those adjustments removed overtime entirely. All signed off within minutes of submission. He paused, letting the numbers settle into the room like something tangible. That is not a system error. No one spoke. No one moved. The room held its breath. The manager glanced around again, but this time there was something different in his search. Not confidence. Not control. Something closer to awareness. Awareness that the room was no longer fully his. You are out of line, he said, his voice lower now, more controlled, but carrying a tension that had not been there before. Marcus took one more step forward, not aggressive, not confrontational, just enough to stand where he could no longer be ignored. No, he said quietly. I am exactly in line. The words did not explain themselves. They did not need to. Evelyn's eyes widened slightly, her attention fixed on Marcus in a way that was no longer cautious. It was focused, intent, like she was beginning to understand that this moment was not unfolding by accident. The manager straightened again, his posture returning, but the foundation beneath it had shifted. If you continue this, he said, you will be removed from this store. Immediately. It was a familiar tactic. Pressure. Threat. Control. The kind that had worked before because no one had ever pushed back far enough to expose it. Marcus did not react to the threat. He did not step back. He simply looked at him, calm, composed, unshaken. That would be difficult, he said. The manager frowned, confusion cutting through his irritation. Why? He asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. Marcus lowered the phone slowly, letting it rest at his side, his gaze never leaving the man in front of him. Because this store, he said, his voice even, measured, carrying through the silence without force, is mine. The words did not explode. They did not need to. They settled into the room with a quiet finality that made everything else fall away. For a second, no one moved. No one spoke. The manager blinked, once, as if the sentence had not fully registered. What did you say? He asked, his voice no longer controlled, no longer certain. Marcus did not raise his voice. He did not change his tone. My name is Marcus Hale, he said, and I own this company. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of realization, of shock, of something shifting all at once. The employees looked at him differently now, not because of the title he had just spoken, but because of everything that had led to this moment. Evelyn's hand tightened slightly around the edge of a nearby counter, her eyes fixed on Marcus, the weight of what she had heard settling in slowly, deeply. The manager stepped back, just half a step, but it was enough. Enough to show that something had changed. Not just in the room, but in the balance of it. And Marcus, standing there without raising his voice, without demanding attention, had just done something far more powerful than that. He had taken the truth out of the shadows and placed it where no one could ignore it anymore. And this time, it was not going back. The silence did not break all at once. It fractured slowly, like glass under pressure, each person in the room processing what they had just heard in their own time, in their own way. Marcus Hale. The name carried weight even when it was not spoken out loud, and now it sat in the center of the room, undeniable, irreversible. The manager's posture, once sharp and controlled, seemed to lose its edge. Not completely, not dramatically, but enough for those watching to notice. Enough to change how the room felt. That is not possible, he said finally, the words coming out slower than before, like they had to push through something unfamiliar. Marcus did not react to the disbelief. He had seen it before. Not because people doubted the truth, but because the truth did not match what they expected to see. It is, he replied simply. No explanation. No defense. Just fact. the kind that did not need to be repeated. A quiet murmur moved through the employees, not loud, not chaotic, just a shift in energy. Heads that had been lowered now lifted. Eyes that had avoided contact now looked directly at Marcus, not with fear, but with something closer to recognition. Not of who he was, but of what this moment meant. Evelyn stood completely still, her gaze fixed on him, her expression unreadable at first. Then slowly something changed. It was not shock. It was not relief. It was understanding. The kind that came when something you had felt for a long time finally had a name. The manager took another step back, his grip on the tablet loosening slightly, like the object had lost its authority along with him. If this is some kind of misunderstanding, he said, trying to regain ground that was already gone, we can clarify it privately. Marcus shook his head, just once. Nothing about this is private, he said. His voice remained calm, but there was a firmness now, something anchored, something final. Not anymore. The words settled over the group, and for the first time, no one looked away. The manager's eyes flicked to the employees, then back to Marcus, calculating, searching for a way to reframe what was happening. You cannot just walk in here and make accusations without context, he said, his tone tightening again, reaching for structure, for control. Marcus took a slow breath, not out of hesitation, but out of precision. Context is exactly what I am providing, he said. He reached into his pocket once more, pulling out the phone, but this time, he did not hold it close. He turned it outward, the screen facing the room. Numbers. Names. Time logs. Clean. Clear. Unarguable. This is not one mistake, he continued. It is not one employee. It is a pattern. Repeated. Approved. Hidden behind language that makes it sound acceptable. The room leaned in without moving. The kind of attention that did not need direction. The manager's eyes locked onto the screen, then shifted quickly away, as if looking too long would confirm something he was not ready to admit. Those records can be interpreted in different ways, he said, but the confidence was thinner now, stretched. Marcus lowered the phone slowly. Then let us interpret them together, he replied. There was no challenge in his voice, no raised tone, just an invitation that felt more like a line drawn in the ground. Evelyn took a small step forward. Not enough to be noticed by everyone, but enough for Marcus to see. Enough for the moment to include her. She looked from the manager to Marcus, her voice quiet but steady when she spoke. Those are our hours, she said. It was not a question. It was not a guess. It was truth, spoken without hesitation. The manager turned toward her, the instinct to respond rising quickly. You do not have all the information, he began, but Evelyn did not step back this time. I have my information, she said, and I know when I am here. The words were simple, but they carried something new. Not defiance, not anger, clarity. And that clarity shifted the room again. Marcus watched her for a moment, not as a CEO observing an employee, but as someone witnessing the exact reason he had come here in the first place. This was never just about data. It was about voice. And once it was heard, it could not be dismissed as easily as before. The manager opened his mouth, then closed it again, the response he had ready no longer fitting the moment. He looked around, searching for alignment, for support, but found something different instead. Attention. Expectation. The kind that demanded more than a rehearsed answer. Marcus stepped slightly to the side, not to step away, but to make space. This is where it changes, he said, his voice steady, carrying through the room without force. Not because I am here, but because the truth is. The sentence did not end with emphasis. It did not need to. It lingered, settled, became something the room could not ignore. And in that moment, the structure that had held everything in place began to show its cracks, not loudly, not violently, but clearly enough for everyone to see that it was never as solid as it pretended to be. The room did not erupt. It did something far more powerful than that. It listened. The kind of silence that follows truth is not empty. It is heavy, intentional, and impossible to ignore. Marcus stood still, not at the center, but steady enough to hold it together as everything else began to shift around him. The manager's composure, once carefully constructed, now showed its seams. He adjusted his stance, straightened his shoulders, tried to recover the version of himself that had always worked before. We can review these claims through the proper corporate process, he said, his voice returning to something close to formal. as if structure alone could restore control. There are procedures for this. Marcus did not interrupt. He let the words land, let them exist in the space they had once dominated. Then he shook his head slightly. Procedures are meant to protect people, he said calmly, not protect the problem. The distinction settled into the room with quiet force. A few employees shifted again, but this time it was different. Not discomfort. Alignment. The kind that happens when something long unspoken finally has language. The manager exhaled slowly, his eyes narrowing just enough to reveal what he was thinking. Not denial anymore. Calculation. If there were errors, he said, choosing each word carefully, they can be corrected. Marcus nodded once. They will be, he replied. But correction is not the same as accountability. The word accountability did not need emphasis. It carried its own weight. The manager's grip on the tablet loosened further, his fingers no longer anchored to it like before. It was no longer a shield, just an object. What exactly are you suggesting? He asked, though the question sounded less like curiosity and more like delay. Marcus took a step forward, not to close distance, but to clarify position. I am not suggesting anything, he said. I am stating what is already in motion. He lifted his phone again, but this time, he did not show the screen. He did not need to. An external audit team has already been deployed, he continued. Independent. Unfiltered. Every record, every adjustment, every approval chain is being reviewed as we speak. A ripple moved through the room, stronger now, more visible. The employees were no longer just listening. They were processing what change actually looked like when it was real. The manager's expression tightened, the first clear sign that control had slipped beyond recovery. You cannot just bring an outside review without notifying management, he said, but the authority in his voice had thinned, stretched to something fragile. Marcus met his gaze without hesitation. I just did, he replied. No anger, no raised tone, just certainty, the kind that does not argue. The manager glanced around again, but this time, there was no illusion left. The room was not his anymore. Not in the way it had been. The structure he relied on, the quiet compliance, the unspoken rules, they were no longer holding. Until that review is complete, Marcus continued, his voice steady, measured. All timekeeping authority is suspended at this location. The words landed clean. Final. A few employees exchanged looks, not of confusion, but of recognition. Something real was happening. Something that could not be undone with a conversation after the meeting. The manager opened his mouth, then paused. The response caught somewhere between habit and realization. You cannot remove operational control without a transition plan, he said, but it sounded less like a challenge and more like a statement he hoped would still matter. Marcus did not rush his reply. The transition has already started, he said. Effective immediately, payroll and scheduling will be handled through centralized oversight until further notice. The structure was shifting in real time. Not loudly, not chaotically, but undeniably. Evelyn stood quietly, her hands resting at her sides, her posture unchanged, but her presence different now. She was no longer blending into the background. She was part of the moment, not because she demanded it, but because the truth she carried had finally been seen. Marcus turned slightly, his attention moving from the manager to the rest of the room. If your hours have been adjusted without your consent, he said, his voice reaching every corner without strain, they will be reviewed and corrected. Fully. Transparently. No one spoke, but something in the room lifted. Not completely. Not all at once. But enough. Enough to feel the difference between what was and what could be. The manager stepped back again, this time without trying to hide it. The distance was no longer strategic. It was real. He looked at Marcus, then at the employees, then down at the tablet in his hand, as if seeing it for what it was now. Limited. Insufficient. This is not how things are done, he said quietly, almost to himself. Marcus heard it, but did not respond right away. He let the statement exist, let it echo against everything that had just changed. Then he answered, just as quietly. That is exactly why it has to be done this way. The words did not close the moment. They opened something else. Something larger than the room, larger than the store, larger than the system that had allowed this to continue. And as the silence settled again, it was no longer the silence of control. It was the silence of something breaking, something shifting, something finally being seen for what it was. And this time, there was no going back. The The meeting did not end with applause. It ended with something quieter, something far more lasting. People did not rush back to their stations right away. They lingered, just for a moment, as if stepping away too quickly would make everything that had just happened feel less real. Marcus did not speak again immediately. He did not need to. The truth had already been placed where no one could ignore it, and now it was doing what truth always does when it is finally seen. It was changing people. The manager stood near the edge of the group, no longer at the front, no longer directing the room. His tablet rested at his side, and used, irrelevant. For the first time, he looked like someone who was not sure what came next. Not because he did not understand the system, but because the system no longer worked the way it used to. Marcus watched him for a moment, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with clarity. This was never about one person. It was about what had been allowed to grow unchecked. And now, it was being confronted. One layer at a time. Evelyn moved slowly, stepping away from the line of employees, her eyes still fixed on Marcus. There was something different in her expression now. Not relief, not exactly. Relief was temporary. This felt deeper, like something that had been held down for a long time had finally been allowed to rise, even if only a little. Marcus turned toward her, the distance between them no longer defined by roles or titles, but by something simpler. Recognition. You stayed, he said quietly. Evelyn gave a small nod. I always stay, she replied. The words carried the weight of years, of choices made without options, of strength that had never needed an audience. Marcus held her gaze for a moment longer, then spoke again. That should not have been the requirement, he said. It was not an apology, but it carried the same sincerity. Evelyn considered that, her expression softening just slightly. It was the reality, she said. Until now. The last two words did not rise in volume, but they shifted the meaning of everything before them. Marcus nodded once, acknowledging both the truth of the past and the possibility of what came next. Around them, the store began to move again, slowly at first, then with more rhythm. Employees returning to their stations, but not in the same way as before. Something had changed in how they carried themselves. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to notice, enough to matter. A quiet confidence replacing the careful caution that had filled the space earlier. Marcus reached into his pocket one last time, pulling out his phone, not to reveal anything, not to prove anything, but to confirm what was already in motion. A message flashed across the screen. Audit confirmed. Immediate action authorized. He read it once, then lowered the phone, the weight of responsibility settling fully into place. Not as a burden, as a decision. He looked back at Evelyn. Your hours will be corrected, he said. All of them. And the rest will be reviewed the same way. Evelyn did not react the way most people might expect. She did not smile widely. She did not celebrate. She simply nodded, her eyes steady. That matters, she said. And it did. Not because of the numbers, not because of the policy, but because of what it represented. Fairness. Dignity. Something that should have been there from the beginning. Marcus glanced around the store one more time, taking it in with a different understanding than when he had first walked in. The shelves, the lights, the people. It was all the same. And yet, it was not. Because now, it had been seen. And once something is seen clearly, it cannot return to what it was before. The manager stepped forward slightly, hesitation in every movement, like someone learning how to stand in a space that no longer belonged to him. What happens now? He asked, his voice quieter than before, stripped of its earlier certainty. Marcus met his eyes, not with judgment, but with directness. Now, he said, everything gets reviewed. Not just the numbers, the decisions behind them. The manager nodded slowly, the weight of that settling in, unavoidable. Marcus did not look away. And after that, he continued, we decide who should be responsible for what comes next. It was not a threat. It was not a promise. It was a process. One that did not rely on silence or control, but on something far less comfortable. Accountability. The room did not react outwardly, but the understanding was there, shared, unspoken, real. Evelyn stood where she was, her posture steady, her presence no longer something that could be overlooked. She had not raised her voice. She had not demanded attention. She had simply told the truth when it mattered. And that had been enough. Marcus took a step back, not to leave, but to allow the moment to settle without him at the center of it. Because this was never meant to be about him. It was about what happens when someone who has been overlooked is finally heard. And as the store continued its quiet return to motion, one thing remained, clear and undeniable. Power can build a system, but truth is what decides whether it deserves to stand.